everyone. I'm Avery Rockwell, writer and director of 1001. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person, but thank you all so much for being there. And also, absolutely have to thank We Are Parables for putting this special panel discussion together. So I know that you guys are going to be talking about some of the many themes in the movie. I mean, whether it's Black womanhood, Black masculinity, how those things kind of actually conflict with each other, as well as just the way the world is changing, the way cities are changing, neighborhoods are changing, and the impact that it's having on us, like the human price of that. So I think that this is a movie that it is meant to provoke conversation. And so I hope we really have a really informed, much needed confrontation of a lot of these topics. And you keep talking about it. I mean, I appreciate everyone for coming out and supporting this movie so much. Continue to spread the word. It'll be in cinemas April 21st. So please check it out again. Tell all your friends, your loved ones, everybody. Please check out the film. And my heart and love goes out to you on behalf of myself, my cast and crew, Teyana Taylor, who I wish could be here as well. But yeah, we're just, you know, this was made with love and it was made with care. And so I'm excited that you actually have the opportunity now to address all the things that I cared about, and the things that I wanted to say, and share what you have to say about it as well. So take care and have a wonderful conversation, everybody. Thank you.
Hello, 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 good evening and welcome. My name's Akua Gyamfi, fan of the British Blacklist, but I'm here with We Are Parable and our wonderful young guest I'm going to introduce soon, to talk about the brilliant and powerful film 1001, starring Teyana Taylor in the lead. It's a really thought-provoking, powerful film, as I said, and we're just going to get into some of the themes and the story of it all. Please, guys, I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves, who you are and what you do, starting with Anthony.
Everyone, I'm Anthony Andrews. I'm the co-founder and creative director of We Are Parable.
And Kieran.
Hey, my name's Kieran Yates. I'm a journalist and I'm the author of All the Houses I've Ever Lived In, which is out now.
Nice. I'm excited. We're going to get into your book as well because amazing story. So guys, we've watched 1001. Can you give me your first thoughts about the film after watching it? I'll start with you, Kieran.
And I thought it was really beautiful. I thought it was like a beautiful depiction of like neighborhood and community, but also how so much life is lived under the kind of oppression of the state and the oppression of like particularly what it felt like to live in New York in the 90s when, sort of almost every element of working class Black life was demonized and criminalized. And, the film is really about how you make home underneath that, under the kind of terrorism from the state. And I think that despite that, there were like real moments of like beauty and tenderness. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I love Teyana, obviously.
Yeah, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I thought it was such a love letter to New York in the sense of how, you see the city changing over the decades that the film covers. And, similarly, I thought that, the beauty that was in the struggle, the fact that you see in there's the main character played by Teyana Taylor go through all of these trials and tribulations to try and keep her family together and to ensure that her family have more to have than she had. It's a really authentic depiction, but there are beautiful moments, but there are also some really sad moments. But I think it was a really ambitious and really well executed film.
Yeah, I just to chip in, I think both I'm a mixture of what both of you have said. There's a lovely letter to New York, especially because I was a young Londoner, teenage girl, reading the Source magazine and listening to primarily East Coast hip hop at the time. So, and I'm not sure, like maybe I hadn't been to New York just yet. I think I went to New York in '99. So that kind of like real, I don't know, voyeuristic yet inspired and dream goal to go to New York, even amongst knowing the risky politics and the working class plight and the Black plight in those times. I really wanted to go. So seeing that, we've seen it in different depictions in loads of films, but something about this felt really gritty and really truly New York, right in the actual streets. It humanized some of the mythical stories that I imagined from books and magazines, like I said, and the art that we were seeing. But there's something about this that was very, very well, it felt very authentic. I wasn't there at the time, but felt authentic to the stories that I'd been reading. So I really appreciated that. Yeah, so yeah, same. It was a kind of like a love letter to that time as well.
Mhm.
But, and you guys mentioned some of the messages that rang out to you guys, but what stood out as the main message behind 1001? What do you think AV, the director, wanted to get across to the audience? Or what resonated to you the most, I would say? Maybe we can't predict what she was thinking, but what do you think? What did it mean to you?
Well, for me, I mean, the title of the film obviously comes from the home that we see during the film, you know, and we know that homes like this for so many communities is where the majority of your life happens, right? It's where where life is taking place, but it's also like it acts as a security and a protection to what's going on outside. And like there's a long history of parents, particularly the Black Parents Network in the UK, but you know, parents globally, who always like grappled with this idea of like, how do you keep your children safe? And one of the ways was like, you keep people inside, especially boys, you keep them inside the house. And you know, it speaks to the kind of the fear of what's happening outside. And it's not paranoia, it's a very real fear. It's like, how do we let our children, our family, our loved ones into a world which feels increasingly sinister and dangerous? And you know, that hasn't changed in so many ways. And so I thought that, yeah, for me, it was just like, you know, it's a grappling for home, not only for us to feel stability, but as like a necessity to feel safe. And when you're talking about feeling safe, you also have to talk about all the things outside that are not making you feel safe too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I'd say, you know, one of the key messages that I got from this was just around the resilience of Black women. You know, I saw a lot of Inez. I saw a lot of my mum in Inez, and I saw a lot of people that, you know, Black women that I grew up with in Inez. You know, just the fact that she's, you know, very much a tiger mum. She's like fighting for her, you know, fighting for her family at every particular opportunity. You know, it's parts at the start of the film where she's trying to keep the family unit together. And even when she's going through, you know, challenges with her partner, it's really about trying to keep that family unit together. And, you know, I loved what you said, Kieran, about the home and how important it is. And we see over the course of the film what happens to the home and how it acts as a visual metaphor for what's happening to the family. And I think that's just a really, you know, really neat bit of storytelling that, you know, the film really tries to drive home. I also think that what's really interesting about it being a love letter to New York is seeing how New York almost changes for the main characters in the film. It starts off as being very community-led, and then as the film progresses, you start to see that individualistic nature that comes in, you know, partly due to gentrification. It's very much everyone out for themselves as opposed to a community that comes together and supports one another. And I thought showing that sort of the way the city is starting to change was, again, very indicative of, you know, what we see around the world. So I think although it felt like quite a insular, singular story, there's so many, you know, universal themes that I think you could pull out. And yeah, I think it was just a very well done piece of work for sure.
Used to like when I got spicy. Try and be quiet. You should try and be quiet, right? Quiet like when you went missing for weeks and I sat here and said nothing. And never mind who you was with.
See, Dave.
If I get any more quieter, I won't even have a voice at all.
I'm not about to sit here and argue with you.
That's real easy for you to say because you get to be the saint, right?
I think, again, what rang out for me with this film is the tiger mom, is the resilience of a Black mother, and who would by any means necessary make sure that at least one, at least if she can't save them all, she can save one, and she's going to try her darndest to do that. And I think that maternal, that Mother Earth thing that is applied to Black women in this instance, it just really shone through this. And actually, when you were saying a lack of community, a loss of community, I saw that from the imposing of the system on this tiny family. However, even there was a moment, I don't know, I'm about to do some spoilers, but there was a moment where you see, despite the situation that they're in, there's still an outreach to some people that you might not necessarily think that unit could be amicable with, friendly with, but there's an outreach where regardless of the issues at hand, sometimes the community is like, well, we can be beefing, we can hate each other,
Yeah.
but when time's needed, we'll come together and band together against the bigger issue. And I think that's something that we sometimes gets lost in politics and the back and forth is today, that actually communities of the working class, lower class ground, we do come together when we're facing the man, as it were, even despite our differences. When those of you, when you watch it, you'll kind of maybe hopefully get what I'm saying about certain characters not having the best relationship. However, when times must, they come together and rally around each other. Kieran, I'd love to speak to your story, because though this story is about a young mother and the relationship with her son, there's also the very real effects of gentrification, which Anthony touched on, and the plight of the working class versus landlords and the system, as it were. Would love to hear more about your story, All the Houses I've Ever Lived In, and how those moments in the film kind of touched you based on your experiences.
Yeah, well, my book's about, like, you know, basically housing precarity. You know, it's like, what is your life like if you have been like precarious with where you live from a very young age? And, you know, for a lot of people that follows you throughout your whole life. You know, I grew up in a single parent family. My mum was just, you know, moving from job to job, doing like, you know, cash in hand 0-hour contracts. And we know that the things that follow that are like evictions, having to stay in temporary accommodation, having to stay with aunties, families, you know, people in your network or community that can like give you short-term homes before you find something for yourself. And so that kind of, that idea of like whoever is around in your community just like holding you for a brief moment so you have the strength to repair or move on, I think really spoke to me in this film. And, you know, where Inez was kind of trying to find a little network of people in her life, you know. And I think that we've experienced that all the time. But it's also like, I think my, you know, like my sense when I was watching it is it just made me think about the erasure of like the cultural and social and political contributions of Black women in particular, and the Black labour that underpins whole communities being able to thrive. You know, so much of, you know, even the existence of like South Asian communities or whatever in this country is really in gratitude to like Black thinkers, huge communities that have been able to provide a huge network. And I think that has often been erased in the way that we have cultural contributions. And it's interesting that you talk about the way that we think about New York as well, because I think like definitely through the 2000s, our ideas of New York was a gentrified New York sold to us. It was about Sex and the City or, you know, girls or, you know, whatever. It was like a version that completely erased, particularly Black women, but like all communities of color, working class people, and a whole shifting economy and society, and people who still existed, you know. And I think that should be a lesson to us for when we're thinking about London or our locale, and think about the stories that are being told and think about how much they reflect the reality. And I think that's what I really took from it. It really made me see my own community and say, gentrification is a housing issue, but it's also a cultural issue about who gets to tell the stories about where we live.
Thank you. I smiled a little bit when you said those of us who were raised with the Sex and the City being the first kind of insight. That's like, you baby, you little baby. But those of us who are like 100 years old, we did have the pre-gentrification New York as our backdrop, and that's what the time that I spoke of, and the time that it's set in the 90s as a teen, it was seeing the hood was glamorized essentially to us, that working class neighborhood, that they would call it the project community and stuff like that, the welfare state communities, and how a lot of those narratives sold survival in those spaces despite what was going on. But yes, definitely through the ages where it got kind of cleaned up and we had the Sex and the City version, yeah, it hid a lot of the truths that we actually knew to exist. And there was there's also, you know, the wonderful Aaron Kingsley Adetola, who played a young Terry, a 6-year-old. When I saw him on screen, my heart just wrenched because he's so cute, so beautiful. And there's something in that, seeing a beautiful young Black boy on screen, but also knowing that the depiction is that he's at a loss, he's in the system, and he doesn't have that nurturing care that he needs. What was that like for you as a father, seeing this young boy that could potentially get lost in the system from at the beginning of the film, that young boy and what his needs would have been?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a bittersweet experience watching that, because, you know, through no fault of my mum's own, like, I was in that situation where I had to stay at home and sort of, you know, fend for myself because there was no one else to look after me. So I, you know, look at that scene where he's at, you know, he's at home and he's, you know, told not, don't answer the door, don't do all that stuff, and it's like, it might seem like it's a really cruel place to be, and he has to fend for himself in that scenario, but when you're in that situation, you kind of feel like a bit empowered. You kind of feel like, yeah, I feel responsible. I feel like I can make myself some food. I feel like I can just watch the TV and go off and do something else. And I think that's down, again, going back to the love that Black women have for their children, that you never feel that you have less than. And I think that even though he's in this system and, you know, there might be needs that he may have, I feel they're still being met by this woman who's doing everything she possibly can to support him. And I know that certainly when I was in those experiences, I never felt that I was missing out on something, that, you know, there was no one around to look after me. I felt my mother's love even when she was out working, because I knew it was just for us. And so that scene, although it looks a certain way on the surface, where this child's been, you know, for want of a better expression, abandoned, actually it couldn't be further away from the truth, because there's love all around him. So, you know, I felt like seeing that just reminded me of that particular memory, and just thinking, yeah, you know what, there's love there, even when you can't necessarily touch it and feel it, you know? So, yeah.
But I was saying that though we're speaking about Black mothers, because this is what the film's about, this doesn't discount all the other mothers from other cultures and traditions where the mum is the matriarch, she's the pinnacle, and it's the nurturing of many lost babies isn't just the domain of Black women, but in society, that's kind of the image that gets out there, that the Black woman is the strongest type of mother figure out there. But there are other cultures where it rings as true. Kieran, I was going to say that this film also talks to speaks to the power and resilience of women. And I again, having had a little tiny bit of a nomadic childhood myself, and then being able to survive some of those moments to be where I am today. And similarly to you and your experiences that you were brave enough to bring to your book, that, you know, probably goes into depth about your experiences. I think we're in this space where women are starting to speak up about their truths and their experiences, and they're getting into their power. And, you know, the world seems to be surprised that women are demanding their equality and want to be seen as whole human beings rather than support acts to men. And there's something in how Inez navigated it, even though she makes a decision about how to complete her family, make her family complete, it's seemingly on her terms. Can you speak to that, any experience in life and how that resonated, and just how, you know, the journey that you've been to where you are today, and how that empowers you or emboldens you as a woman?
I mean, you know, as a child, I grew up constantly seeing the unpaid labor of my mum making home. And that wasn't about, like, you know, cleaning all the time or like making food, although obviously that was part of it. It was about, how do you create something like every time? Like, you know, we live in so many different houses, we have to move all the time. How do you do that every time? How do you fill a place with love? How do you make sure your child is feeling stable and secure? And even though I had, you know, these kind of psychic breaks between places, and, you know, I did the kind of things that lots of children do. They try and negotiate with their parents, right? Like, can I stay here a bit longer? They try and, you know, just do what you can to try and find a semblance of stability. And I think it really speaks to, you know, a kind of like an ancestral like wisdom that we are products of, where, you know, predominantly women in the house have said, listen, this is how we drench the home with love, and that's how we support each other, and that's how we look after each other, and that's how we manage, and that's how we survive. And for me, it was like, and also that's how you can, you know, empower your voice. You know, these are things that you can do. These are, you know, maybe if it's like reading or listen to music or like listen to the Janet album again, it's like there's ways where you can like feel, you know, like you are not just a victim of a state that leaves you behind. And, you know, we know that, like, we see products of this every day. We see it in the film. We see that we're existing in, you know, a lot of structures which are not built to care for us. And so we have to look to, you know, our matriarchs, or, you know, our patriarchs, or whoever we have accessible to us. And so I think that, yeah, you know, this stuff is very real. Like, not feeling like you have home is very real. It has huge impacts. It has, like, you know, it's arguably a public health emergency, not only because of our sort of the mental health impact that it has, but also because of, like, you know, people feel like they have home, but then they're in these like crazy conditions which are like bad for them, which make them sick, and we are told that we have to accept these terms all the time. So you're so right that actually it's like, I think that this is like very beautiful that women particularly are saying, no, we're not going to accept those terms. No, that isn't good enough for me, and actually I can say no. And how do I not only advocate for myself but my whole community?
It's so
Absolutely.
interesting. I was going to say, Kieran, it's so interesting what you're saying about, you know, finding something to make you feel like home. That just reminded me of Terry, the character of Terry, and how he found that in music and how that made him feel less alone, you know? So that was, yeah, it's really interesting that there was that reference for him, whereas like he put a tape on, he found out about Marvin Gaye, and then, you know, you see what his trajectory is.
And I loved in the apartment, you could see the like club flyers that were like up on the walls, and you could see all of that. And it was like, yes, you are someone who is like, I love this party so much. I've taken the flyer after and I've blue tagged it on my wall. And that says something about who I am.
Right.
I literally was going to ask you guys as a segue, like when you, in your times of feeling unsafe, depending for whatever you went through as a child, where was your safe space? Because exactly, Terry found his safe space in music. Where did you guys kind of retreat to? Because mine was books and toast and honey. I'd have stacks of honey and toast, and I'd be head deep in a book, loads of books. That was my cocoon of safety when I felt things weren't right in the outside world.
I think for me, films, unsurprisingly, I think, you know, BBC Two, I always talk about this moment in the 90s that BBC Two had, where I think it was for about 6 months straight, they would show, you know, some of the greatest Black cinema known to man. Like, you know, and I remember seeing Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee. It came on about 11:30 at night, so way past my bedtime. I think I was about maybe 12 at the time, and just almost dozing off to sleep, and then you're sort of hit with that explosion of color with Rosie Perez dancing, and the film starts, and I'm just blown away by that moment. And I think from that moment on, films just became that safe space for me, where, you know, I could be transported to New York, I could be transported to anywhere, and you know, you could just really see the wide breadth of storytelling that was available to me. So I think, you know, films have always had that safety for me. So wherever I can sit down and watch a film, it just feels like home. So yeah, that definitely is something that I feel very strongly about.
Yeah, that was my second safe space, film and TV. But yes, Kieran, what about you?
Oh, that's so beautiful from both of you. Yeah, it was definitely music for me, but I think that because a lot of that was from the estate that I kind of started life on, a very formative estate for me was the Green Man Lane estate in West London. And like, as you may know, it's like, you know, the very thin walls of an estate make it very easy for music culture to leak in and out of the walls, right? So you hear music through the walls all the time. And it was like, you know, your windows are open, you hear people playing music. And so this kind of like idea of like not only community sharing, but like a young person, you know, sort of listening to soca and listening to Bashman, and then like listening to Bollywood from my mum, and then listening to like gospel and Kirk Franklin and like Janet and Beanie Man, like those kind of things were so formative to like my ear, like growing up and being like, it's all right, you can make noise, and it's all right if you listen to someone, you sing along and your neighbors hear it, and it's all right if there's a Shubs next door and you hear it at night, because this isn't the culture is not about like complaining about your neighbor's noise. It felt like it was community sharing. And that's not to glamorize like all the things that, you know, are difficult about estate life, but it is to say that it starts you off with this idea that like music is not only to be shared, but it's to be like delighted in.
I am so smiling at that, because what I think what myself, Anthony, and you have said is already in my mind created this little Spike Lee movie, will be our, you know, Anthony AK and Kieran movie joint. And it, that richness that we've just described, it's like me reading a book, eating toast and honey, hearing my brother Anthony's films playing in the room next door, hearing blasting music, and then we've got the neighbors playing their music, you've got the smells of the estate, like food, and It's just so rich, and it's just I love just that moment. I was giddy. I'm giddy with the nostalgia. I don't know what it is, but I just felt that, and I felt that watching 1001 in those moments when the community are outside and then getting involved and shouting across the street or whatever. It's just that vibe. It really captured that quite well in a story that's not necessarily even about that per se. But yeah, I just love that moment. I feel chills. Let's speak about a little bit about the actual performances, because this film would not exist without the strong performances of the characters, the actors involved. We've got Teyana Taylor, as we know, played Inez. We've got 3 versions of Terry. So you've got Aaron Kingsley Adetola, who I told you about, who plays 6-year-old Terry. You've got Avon Courtney, who played 13-year-old Terry. And then you've got Josiah Cross, who played Terry at 17 years old. All very heartbreaking, brilliant, strong performances. And then you have William Catlett, who played Lucky, who becomes a father figure. Without going into too much detail, he steps in as a father figure for Terry, and I guess a husband's support for Inez. Just speaking to the performances, what did you think of everyone's performance? And who, there's lots of buzz about awards and stuff, and I don't know, is that important? But how did you feel about the performances in this film?
I thought Lucky was like definitely the performer. I mean, I think they were all brilliant. I loved like young Aaron. I thought that he was like, he did a lot with like very little lines. I mean, he must have had like this many lines, but he like did a lot. But I think that relationship with him and Lucky and the way that was portrayed on screen, which was like very pared back, it was like very like reserved at times. A lot of it was just done with body language and sort of like facial sort of nods to each other, really made me like emotionally respond. And I thought that was beautifully done. And I thought that, yeah, Teyana, I was surprised. I didn't know, like, and this doesn't mean to do like, I don't mean to do her down, but I was really like, wow, that was like, I felt it. And yeah, and to me, when I was watching it, I was like, you've seen those women in your life. That's like an auntie, a mum, a neighbor. That's like, you are taking something from like the power that you already exist in your life and you're projecting it on screen, surely.
Anthony, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, similarly with Teyana, I was blown away because I mean, obviously, I know her for her music, and I think she's been on a couple of reality TV shows. But for that to be the first acting role that she's had, and it's a lead central performance, and there's so much that she's got to do to carry this film forward. It's an incredible performance, and I hope it does get recognized for a number of awards, because from the very first frame you see her on the screen, you completely believe everything that she's trying to do. She walks with a purpose, like she knows she's trying to get from A to B. She's trying to make sure she's got somewhere to stay, and you believe it. You're just completely in that, in that world with her. And I would agree with Aaron, who played Terry at 6. I think that actor is doing such great work, because you have to establish the chemistry between the mother and son. You have to establish the relationship that he may have with his stepdad, which takes a really interesting turn. And this character again isn't saying much, but it's the eyes, it's the slight physical movements, it's him moving around in a house all by himself and seeing how young kids do it. Like there's just so many great moments in there. And I think the character of Lucky, played by William Catlett, is such a nuanced performance that I wasn't necessarily expecting. You just think, stepdad's coming on the scene, it's going to go this particular way, but then you get this really lovely relationship that is forged out of him coming on the scene. So yeah, I think just great performances all around. I think the performances are definitely the standout feature for me in this film, because I think everyone's doing great work.
So who's the girl so you hanging out with?
That's the girl, Mom.
Was she your girlfriend?
Come on. I like Spanish girls, Mom.
Pardon me? What, she look too much like you for you to take seriously? You know what, little boy? I love you. I really do. But I'm starting not to like you anymore.
Yeah, I definitely, they carried it all. Teyana, chef's kiss performance, and like similar to you, and I didn't know where to go with it, what to say and how to say it, but it was with Lucky, the expectation it would go one way and then it going a different way, because we're so maybe conditioned that in that setting, where can you find joy? When will there ever be a success? When will there ever be happiness? It's always going to be negative. So though there are some bits and things that happen, him being that father figure that we can rely on is interesting, and I appreciated it. And again, yeah, and I think Josiah Cross, just to speak to Josiah, in his moments during the end, as things unfold, I really appreciated, because what the conversation that's being had, as I said, women are finding their footing in this new modern space, and we're starting to speak up and define our position on this earth as equals. I understand that, and maybe Anthony can speak to that. I understand that men and boys have to kind of readjust their settings of what they've been told about being the leaders, and having to make room for women that are just like, we're not going to stand behind you, we now want to stand beside you, or maybe sometimes in front of you. But I like seeing 17-year-old Terry's vulnerability, and it not looking like he was weak necessarily. He was in touch with his emotions. Because even in a situation like that, men and boys are made to feel that they can't cry, they can't be emotional, they have to be tough, they can't be at a loss when their world is turned upside down. They have to be strong. So I don't know, Annie, if you want to speak to that type of depiction in the story, and how generally, like, how men and boys are portrayed on screen, especially Black men and boys.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you know, to your point, I think it was a beautiful depiction of you know, a young Black man showing vulnerability on screen. You know, you see him, you know, confide to his, you know, potential partner, and I think it is a really poignant scene. And you know, it unfortunately still feels quite revolutionary. You know, I think I saw a play a few days ago, and you know, seeing two Black men hug and cry on stage still feels like something very novel. And until it doesn't feel novel, until it's just another emotion that, you know, us as humans feel, then, how much progress have we really made? I feel like, you know, I want to see more depictions of, you know, Black men who are, you know, just letting it all out. There's not this sort of like guard up that you have to sort of hide your emotions and not show how you truly feel. I think this is a great start, and I think that play is another great start. I just really want to continue to see those performances and those emotions really come through, because you know, to use the very often used phrase, we're not a monolith. We're not, you know, just this one kind of aggressive version of a Black man. We're all these different emotions, and to see them on screen and stage and wherever is just a beautiful thing that I'd love to see more of.
And it's great for, I don't know, Kieran, if you want to add your thoughts, for women as well, to see a new version of a man and a boy, and how we respond to that, regardless of our interest romantically, even just interacting as siblings, as business partners, as friends, seeing other versions of the male image that's projected onto or imposed on us. I don't know if you want to speak to some of that, Kieran.
Yeah, you know, I thought that there was like a nuanced depiction in the film, because Lucky and Terry are two very different kinds of men, or they're two very different approaches. And, you know, you're aware all the time of like the pressure, you can feel it all the time, you know, coming from various areas, and you really see it when Terry is suddenly kind of comes into contact with the police under a kind of stop and frisk over nothing, and you can see, you know, how the kind of pain of that bubbles up inside. You know, I mean, a whole generation of young Black men can speak to that experience, and that there's lots of different ways of experiencing that, and lots of different ways of responding to it, kind of emotionally and physically. And like, some people are pushing a lot of that stuff down, you know, and then waiting for outlets to kind of to be able to express it. And I thought that was very tender about Terry. You know, there wasn't maybe a reaction that we might have already seen represented quite a lot on film. It was kind of like holding it, sharing it with someone that you trust, and it was all done with a tenderness and a sensitivity that I thought was really touching and really sad, and made me think about all the different ways that like generations of people have had to respond in that way, and had to think about ways to respond that doesn't just blow up their whole lives.
Yeah, I appreciate, I think this film has patience. I think it really, really lets us look at how we can be patient with, or we need to be patient with each other. There are moments throughout this film where patience has to be executed, and when patience is executed, a better result is found. And I'm really speaking around the moment, which is a bit of a spoiler, so I'll stop there. before we kind of wrap up, just Kieran, can you just speak to, you know, this film does deal with gentrification and dodgy landlords, and always astounds me what landlords are allowed to get away with, and they, you know, seemingly protected by a multitude of laws, which happens everywhere. You know, the UK and America being quite prolific for their gentrification issues and their uprooting of working class families. Just in general, again, but going back to the story that you've told in your book, what are some of the surprising things you've heard landlords get away with? And if not for you or the likes of Kojo Housing from the UK, got someone who is an advocate for better housing for working class people, you know, if not for you guys and others who speak the truth and challenge councils and boroughs and the government to do better, maybe it's not a question, it's just like, you know, just speaking to how can we from those of us from working class communities who are dependent on maybe government housing or that kind of support, how do we improve our lot, as it were, and go against the man, as it were?
Well, I think that the state of housing is, you know, thanks to unregulated landlords, which were allowed to get away with putting us in conditions that are in a sort of public health crisis. You know, that's everything from damp and mold to structural disrepair to people in temporary accommodation who are being housed in West London in shipping containers, you know, to people who are in neighbourhood barracks. I mean, you know, where we are right now is not sustainable. And it is Black and brown working class communities who are feeling the brunt of that, whether that is kind of post a tragedy like the fire at Grenfell Tower, or whether that is like an estate that you know about, or whether that is just like when your family are coming together and you're talking about people in your family who are in living conditions and don't know what to do about it. So I think that is a really like a very important point. And also it's an important point to say that this is also communities that often find it harder to advocate for each other because maybe your GP thinks that you're over exaggerating, maybe your landlord's not taking you seriously, maybe it's difficult to get another place because of the sort of racism embedded into our housing system, which is very present and very at the surface. So I think that not to let the government off the hook, they need to do their thing and there's public policy that needs to be happening there. But I think like thinking about how we can help our immediate communities, whether that's like providing translation for someone like, you know, on our street or someone in our neighborhood to be able to like help them with the admin for their housing association, whether that's like cooking food for people who are totally overwhelmed, whether that is, you know, learning about like bailiff resistance, being like, what do I do when a bailiff comes to my neighbor's door? Is there something that I can do? You know, I think there's like small little things that we can do to help each other that have like, you know, help my mom. Like it helped my mom a lot when like a neighbor was like, let me take your kids to school, you know? And I think that those are things that can be done. And I think also I just wanted to make the point in relation to the film and in relation to what we've been talking about in parenting, the kind of vignettes of like Mayor Bloomberg and like Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who were like these other characters in the film who had their voices heard, are trying to do a different kind of parenting, right? So if we have like Innes kind of giving us love and giving us care, we've got our state officials parenting us like as sheer disciplinarians, telling us just work harder, just do better, it's your own fault. You know, in the UK, we have landlords telling us it's your own fault your house is moldy because you're putting your clothes on the radiator, or it's your own fault because you're not working hard enough and you're not getting a good enough job, whatever. And I think it's really important for us to just resist that and not let that in, you know, not let that psychology of like, this is your own fault, you put yourself there. If you have precarious housing, that's on you because you didn't work hard enough or you didn't make enough money. And I think that once as a community, we can learn to give ourselves grace and give ourselves care and give ourselves love and resist the kind of narratives that are like bombarded with us. I think that's how we can move forward as a community.
I think that's a beautiful way. And do you have anything to add before we wrap up? Because I thought that was beautiful.
I wouldn't even dare try and follow that. That was amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. So guys, I mean, I was trying to think of like, you know, maybe could you give me one word to describe 1001? And I'll start with you.
I'd say love.
Okay.
Say love.
Hear him?
I was going to say home, but I think love is better, actually.
So love is, I'm going to stick with patience because I think there's a lot in that. I'll stick with patience. Thank you so much, guys. Kieran, where can we find you? And importantly, buy your book.
You can find me on Twitter. My name's just Kieran Yates. My book's called All the Houses I've Ever Lived In, and it's like out now. You can get it anywhere. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for like having me. And this was very beautiful.
Anthony, can you tell us where we can keep up to date with We Are Parable and more conversations like this?
You can find us at We Are Parable on Instagram and Twitter, and on our website, weareparable.com.
I'm Akua Gyamfi, fan of the British Blacklist. You can find me at British Blacklist everywhere. And just to let you know that 1001 will be in cinemas for 21st of April. Go see it. It's a very important film. Have a conversation like this. It is a very thought-provoking and emotional. It's a lot. It's a really good, powerful film that you have to watch. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Thank you very much, guys. Good night.
Is that Inez at the princess, the weed? I thought you moved to another shelter. No, you know I was in Rutgers. I really missed you, girl. Yeah, and apparently these roots too. What you been doing? What you been doing? Nothing yet. The roots makes you too. Terry, just let me see your eyes so I know you're not mad at me. I'm staying out of trouble this time. Tell me more about your foster mother. You like her? Would it make you feel better if you came and stayed with me? Yeah. All right, we're gonna go to Harlem, where I grew up at. The city had him. He's not supposed to be with me. Can't you get locked up for that? Not if you keep it to yourself. Where's my dad at? He's gone. But you wouldn't have liked him anyway. I got somebody else in mind. Terry, I want you to meet Lucky. Lucky's gonna be moving in with us. For how long?
Damn.
You better get that chip off your shoulder. I know you hear me. You are my mother.
You a blessing. For your mom especially. You getting older now. Time for you to start thinking for yourself.
Daryl's a very bright kid. Have you thought about MIT, Harvard?
Something's gonna happen. I can feel it.
Is your mother home?
Maybe it's time to give him some of the answers that he's been looking for.
Is Daryl your real name? Have you told anyone else about this?
No, I'm scared.
When are you going to realize that you are enough?
I go to war for you. You know that? Against anybody. Against this whole city. But they're not breaking us up this time.